This is Enaa, in with you in the fight back, and today I'm reviewing Naming the System, Inequality and Work in the Global Economy by Michael Yates. This is largely an introduction to economics and economic theory and capitalism in general. And Michael Yates, if you didn't already know, was an economics professor at the University of Pittsburgh at Jonestown and associate editor at Monthly Review. He's also the author of some other works that you should read, such as Why Unions Matter, Cheap Motels and a Hot Plate, to name a few. Now, economics, based on what I've experienced having taken several economics courses in college, is largely economists seem to speak in their own language, using elaborate models that use a lot to say very little. In fact, it doesn't really relate to the real world. And economists are largely ahistorical, and they seem to believe in some idealized version of capitalism that really has never and will never exist. And in pursuit of that aim, they're pretty much willing to justify the injustifiable, the inequality we experience in today's world. And Michael Yates, although he was an economics professor, he speaks in a language you can understand. He relies on history, and he relates to the real world. And this book is clear, it's easy to understand, it's a good read, it's a good resource. It's something I try and keep very handy. And it was served as my alternative economics textbook for about 3 or 4 months. And I learned more in 5 minutes of reading that than I did in 3 or 4 months of economics class. So, there are 3 criteria in which this book will be judged, and those are the aims Yates sets himself up for. Number 1, he wants to explain the capitalist world economy and the place of workers within it. Now, for the world economy, Yates looks at the growing inequalities between nations, within nations, the gap between rich and poor that continues to widen, the destruction of traditional lifestyles by neoliberal assaults, the growth of the informal sector, and the deskilling of work, among other things. And this is all laid out very well. It's very easy to read, and unfortunately it hasn't changed too much since this book was written several years ago. And Yates also, and this is the part I'd like to look at a little bit more, is he's also looking at unemployment and work. And if you think about it, why do we work? Work, for most of us, isn't something we do because we want to. For instance, an artist who would paint or write because it brings them self-fulfillment, self-enjoyment. It's pretty much an expression of their innermost being. Those of us who worked as a cashier, is that really an expression of your innermost being? No, the work is degrading, it's dehumanizing, it's alienated, and you're being exploited. And Yates is very clear about this. He shows how once skilled jobs have been pretty much de-skilled, how wages are being lowered, living standards are under attack, and your labor is being exploited to serve an oligarchic capitalist class. This is all quite clear, and Yates is very firm on where he stands on this. This oppression is intolerable and something needs to be done. And I was thinking about this, and this is because it's something I've been experiencing lately, is the question of unemployment. The statistics that we've been receiving from the government due to the economic downturn are lying. As Yates points out, the government does all they can to minimize the real figures we read. Unemployment is always much higher than what they actually report. When the government says unemployment is 9%, it's probably quite a bit higher than that. And he also brings up the costs of unemployment. You know, we may not like our dehumanizing, exploitive jobs, but we do need them to buy the necessities of life whenever we actually get paid enough to buy them. Because although we don't want these jobs, we do need them to live. And suddenly, if you can't work for whatever reason, it's, there's not only is no wealth not being produced in society due to mass unemployment, but you're suffering. You're suffering from depression. You may have to receive new training. I mean, to do what? A job that pays less? I mean, that's doesn't that seem wrong? But Yates lays it out there. He shows us these connections between the world economy and what we're experiencing. He puts things in a larger totality. He shows that it's not just a static model that economists are laying out for us, but there's a dynamic to it. There's an inner logic, and we should understand and comprehend that logic. And I really like this book, and I'll tell you why for another personal reason in a moment. And there's a second aim to this book that I want to go into quite briefly, and he wants to encourage those who are interested to explore more. Because an introductory textbook is not going to give you everything. You're not going to get all the subtle nuances you would expect. It's just going to get your foot in the door pretty much. And Yates does that magnificently. Like I said, the writing is clear, concise, it's enjoyable. And in the back of the book, Yates has a bibliography notes that you should check out. And he recommends newspapers, websites, and other books. And I'm just going to name 3 that I'd actually read around the same time as this. For instance, Das Kapital by Karl Marx, Volume 1, 2, or 3. Read them all. Read Harry Braverman's Labor and Monopoly Capital, which I dare to say is probably the best book on why work sucks. And The Theory of Capitalist Development by Paul Sweezy, which is probably one of the best expositions of Marx's political economy that you're ever going to read. And there are plenty of other books there. And another thing Yates does, and this is the third aim of the book, is to encourage you to look beyond the horizon. What do I mean by that? To look for an alternative. Yates says name the system. The system is capitalism. And Yates does lay out the neoclassical, the neoliberal model. He analyzes Adam Smith, Milton Friedman, these other economists, along with Keynesian economists. And it's done very clearly. It's maybe a little short, but it's an introduction. Their works are listed in the bibliography. You can explore at your own leisure. He also lays out the basics of Marxian political economy, the labor theory of value, the contradictions of capitalism, surplus value, and etc., etc. All done very well. But it's not enough to simply understand where we are, the system we live in. We need to know where to go. And Yates, he doesn't hold back. We need a new system. We need socialism. And he looks at various struggles that are going around the world, like democracy within the Teamsters unions, looking at the struggle in Nepal, in Colombia, students against sweatshops. Because for too long in the United States and around the world, we've been told there's no alternative, that we have to accept the way the world is because that's the best there is. Well, sometimes it seems so blatantly obvious to say that, but oppression is intolerable. Exploitation is wrong, and people should do something about it. And you should fight to change the world. And Yates lays out some avenues where struggle is taking place. And in the current economic downturn that we've been experiencing in the last 3 to 4 years, people are starting to wake up, albeit slowly and in their manifold contradictions, but people are waking up. And this book can serve as a wonderful resource for those of you who want to get past the college miseducation you received in economics, and to look at economics as it really exists. To name the system as capitalism and to name the alternative. And why do I say this so forcefully? Several years ago, I was involved in a labor student political economy education among workers, some of whom did not have higher education, some of whom did not speak English. And one of the texts we used was Naming the System. And it was quite gratifying to watch people who really grasp the labor theory of value, to relate not the text that Yates is laying out for you to their own experience, to know that there's a wider pattern, we can understand it, and almost as importantly, we can struggle against it. So if you're looking for a place to start with economics, Naming the System is probably the best place to go. And look at other works of Yates, look at the books he recommends, and don't just read, but get in the struggle. This is Enaa in Within the Fight Back. Until next time.